The perils of the second date. I'd like us to reflect for a moment upon the dangers of the second date. The first date went like a charm. Beautiful restaurant, fabulous food, fine champagne, and witty conversation. In the process, you found out that you both like iceberg lettuce and Fleetwood Mac. And both of you, Seinfeld was a really important show and you equally loved Elaine. It's been a great night and you've shared important things. On the way home, there might be some exploratory kissing, but you don't want to rush into it. There's something really important here, so you're going to go very, very slowly. Anyway, eventually there is a second date, and that's a different kettle of fish. The conversation becomes a bit more earnest, and questions begin to emerge about values, about relationships, and about the future. And a sense of panic, quiet but ever present, is felt. What if this person finds out what I'm really like? The great secret that we all carry. It's a universal secret. That is, within ourselves, in our interior life, where this funny mixture of strengths and weaknesses, fears and hopes, that's the human person. And it takes a great deal of trust before we reveal our true selves to anyone. And up until that point of trust, there's a profound sense of fear that we will be rejected if we are our true selves. And yet, if we don't find that sense of trust, if we don't find the group of people or the person in whom we can trust, there's a danger that we will become sick, that we will experience deep despair if we can't be ourselves. So in that sense, it is healthy. In fact, it's a movement of the spirit for us to emerge, to come out of the closet and to be ourselves. I want to explore that a little bit more about the importance of coming out, and I want to put it in a specific context. Today is the anniversary of the Stonewall Riots that took place in 1969 on the 28th of June in Manhattan in New York. The background to it, of course, is decades of violence and abuse against LGBTIQ persons and communities. Persons who had to live in secret in order to survive. In previous decades, the closet in many ways was the only safe place. In the 50s and 60s, though, gay and lesbian and transgender persons began to develop communities or spaces, safe communities and safe spaces where they could come out, perhaps in a limited way, but they could be themselves. And the Stonewall Inn was one of those places. On that evening, there was a police raid, and in the ensuing violence and abuse, something profound was triggered that we know as the Stonewall Riots. LGBTIQ persons and communities had had enough. It led to 3 days of rioting. Now, whilst there had been dissent previously, there had been movements for change, there was something particularly galvanising about this event in 1969, so much so that the Stonewall Riots have become a powerful symbol for the LGBTIQ communities and persons. But I want to explore that because I think the symbolism is rich, and there are some really important insights and wisdom to be gleaned from it about what it means to be a real person. And I want to put it in context that the resistance that we saw, the cry from the heart, no more, that we saw associated with the Stonewall Riots, in my view, is part of an ancient tradition of resistance against injustice and abuse. Within the Christian tradition, there's very much a clear and strong voice or cry against injustice. You can see it in a couple of obvious texts. If you look in the Hebrew scriptures in the book of Daniel, the second half of that book, it's a call for resistance. It's about a group of Jews who are marginalised, who are experiencing injustice, and the prophet Daniel lets out a cry for resistance, a cry to stand up and to resist the injustice. And so in chapter 11, verse 32, the people who are loyal to their God stand firm and take action. So around about this period, from the 3rd century before the Common Era, right into the 1st century, there are these sporadic movements of resistance against injustice. Some of it was violent, some of it was non-violent. In many ways, Jesus himself was part of that tradition, and Jesus felt passionately about questions of justice and issues of injustice. And we'll see, for example, in the Gospel of Matthew, his concern for those on the edge. And he has this wonderful way of describing those on the edge, the marginalised ones. He refers to them as these little ones. It represents those groups and communities who have been, for social or religious reasons, pushed to the side. And in the name of love, Jesus cries out for justice. And there's a particular scene in the Gospel of Matthew, the so-called cleansing of the temple scene, where Jesus expresses this profound concern for those on the edge with a call for justice. For social and religious reasons, he enters into the outer courtyard of the temple and overturns the tables. He challenges the system that puts people in boxes, that forces people into closets. So we can see within the Christian tradition there is this movement of resistance that stems from a conviction, a belief of the love and compassion of God, but is committed to taking risks in the name of love to work towards justice. And in that context, those people who are marginalised, those groups or individuals who suffer, they become the benchmark or the litmus test of what counts as truly just, as what counts as Christian. I consider very strongly that what took place in the Stonewall Riots was very much part of this movement of this spirit, this cry for justice. And I want to explore the Stonewall Riots in a moment. I want to unpack some of the insights that I think are there to be gleaned. But it's worthwhile just spending a moment or two on this notion of the closet. Normally we associate the closet, of course, with the men's movement or the gay movement, and it's a term that became increasingly significant. And at one level, of course, I can't imagine as a middle-aged straight guy what it's like to come out of the closet in that particular sense. But there's a broader sense of the use of the term closet that applies to all sorts of people, of all shapes and sizes. People of colour, people who live with disability. We'll also talk about closet experiences, about the fear of being their true selves in case they upset someone or it incites abuse. And so in that broader context, there are a whole range of marginalised groups who fear being themselves because there will be a price to pay. Within the Christian tradition, the very heart of the Christian tradition is compassion for people on the edge. Compassion for people who are stuck in the closet, who dare not be themselves. The Stonewall Riots, then, is a celebration of both the human and the divine spirit. It's a plea for us not simply to be ourselves, but for a more compassionate, tolerant, and understanding society that accepts diversity as the norm. So on that note, I want to explore elements of what you could describe as a philosophy or theology of the Stonewall Riots. There are 5 things I want to explore. The first thing is diversity. In this theology, in this philosophy, diversity is the norm. The reason there are closets is that there are people who want to put us in boxes. There are certain ways, prescribed ways of acceptability. It's as if there's only one way of being a human being. So the first element in this theology of the Stonewall Riots is to accept the fact that complexity and diversity is the norm, that difference is perfectly normal, and that there's nothing wrong with being different. In fact, being different is part of the richness and wonder of that human diversity. In this theology of diversity, there's an important place for the divine. When I talk about the divine here, I'm not talking about God as the old man in the sky with the beard, the Monty Python God. I'm talking about the God who is ever present, who flows through the created order, who flows through you and me and makes us one. This sense of the divine, this God, this sense of the sacred works from the inside out. So in this diversity, which is wonderful and which is a gift, each and every one of us has something of the divine, and it works from the inside out. The older we get, the more we trust this inner voice. And this voice is calling all of us to come out, to disclose ourselves, to be our true selves. Now, of course, for some people in some places in the world, the prospect of coming out is a dangerous proposition. And the rest of us should work in the name of justice and compassion for those cultures and communities who are at grave risk of being themselves. But for us in the West, where we have certain democratic freedoms, we also have certain responsibilities to come out, to take a lead, to disclose who we truly are. So the Stonewall Riots then not only are cause for celebration within the LGBTIQ community, but they're an example for each and every one of us of how life ought to be. In the process of coming out, what emerges is our true selves. Now, by that I'm not talking about notions of perfection. If we go back to the image of the perils of the second date and the fear of what's going to happen if we're our true selves, if there is trust, if there's a genuine rapport, then being our true selves is not about being perfect. It's about being authentic. This is who I am. Strengths and weaknesses, gifts and hopes, fears and concerns. But in a context of trust, in this movement of this spirit, this movement of coming out, we are enabled to find, in a sense, our authentic self and to live with ourselves. Above all, this movement that celebrates diversity, that honours the divine, that works from the inside out, which draws us into the world, that calls us to be our true selves, is a movement of love. Today is an important day, June the 28th, and it's cause for celebration. It is fundamentally the movement of love. And the movement of love is courageous. It's willing to take risks. It is a movement of liberation, certainly, but it's also a movement of resistance that is willing to stand up, call out and challenge injustice and violence, all in the name of love.